Hello and welcome to Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and I'm your host for this program, which is designed to give all of us a little more insight into the doings and the folks involved in those doings in and around our state's capital. Our guest today is Lori Wimmer. Lori is a woman who has excelled in many areas in her life and who is now the Executive Director of the Oregon Women's Commission. And without further ado, I'll turn to welcome Lori to our show.
Thank you.
I've been looking at your resume here and trying to develop a little bit of information about you from it, although we've worked together during session and in between sessions. And I guess we should talk a little bit about the commission first, but then I'd kind of like to back up from there and talk a little bit about you as a person and then swing back to politics and those sorts of things. What is the Oregon Women's Commission?
The Commission for Women is the sole official voice for the 1.4 million women, females in Oregon, and we are charged by statute with monitoring and assessing the condition of Oregon women and fighting for their equity in all venues, legal, social, economic, and political.
How long has the commission been in existence?
We were originally created as the Governor's Commission for Women in 1964 by then-Governor Mark Hatfield, and in 1983 were given independent agency status by then-Governor Victor Atiyeh. So it's been 10 years that we've been an independent agency.
I can't help but notice that the heritage of the Women's Commission includes initiation by a Republican governor and transition to a more permanent status under a Republican governor. It sounds like, from what I've picked up, there's also a lot of Democratic support, very much a bipartisan effort.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
This year you're looking at 29 years of activism for women in this state?
That's correct. And we figure that we represent the voice of all kinds of women in Oregon. They come to us with their problems as individuals, as organizations, communities, and identify for us what their concerns are. We go out into those communities with focus meetings nearly monthly and ask them to put on the table their proposals, not only to identify problems, but also to suggest solutions that might be workable, and we advocate for their interests. So it is not simply some sort of marginalized, strident extremist group. It is truly trying to be the voice, a moderate and bridge-building voice for women in Oregon.
Now, how many people do you have on the commission itself?
11 members on the board. That is 9 members who are just average citizens appointed by sitting governors, and then 2 members who are legislators, 1 from each house.
Now, with those 11 members, do they serve as your, in effect, board of directors for your activity as executive director?
That's correct. They are my 11 bosses.
Now, it sounds like a very big bureaucracy with lots of employees. Tell us about the size of the commission.
Well, I'm hired to be there 2/3 time, so that is 0.67 of an FTE. And additionally, we have a half-time clerical assistant, although that position has been ended. As of the June 30th, we will no longer have clerical support. So backtracking, I'm technically without support now.
So basically, you're the lady of all trades, Jill of all trades, instead of Jack of all trades, for the commission, putting together their agenda, working with the commissioners, and then having to go out in the community and try to implement the things that they're propounding?
That's right. I'm the person who does all the research and publications production. Obviously, the board members themselves, though very busy professionals in their own communities, are also committing hundreds of hours of volunteer time to help with all the projects. I am the staff person assigned to really take the ball and run with it, whether it be publications, citizen advocacy, providing resource educational materials, lobbying on women's issues in the legislative session, all of the kinds of functions that we engage in. I am the person who is the coordinator of that.
Well, let's talk about you, Lori Wimmer. I know I've got my cheat sheet, your resume here, and we were talking before we started the program about you having gone to Vassar, where you got your Bachelor of Arts degree. Take us back a little further, though. Where are you originally from?
I'm from Gladstone, Oregon, and I'm proud to be born and bred Oregonian. Although I spent some years on the East Coast in both New York and Washington, D.C., I came home and hoped to put my good education to work for my fellow citizens. And Gladstone was one of those nurturing, warm little communities where one could be a big fish in a little pond, and I really was glad to have the experience of a great childhood growing up, a good education, and a sense of values that I think I put to work every day.
Did you graduate from high school in Gladstone?
Mm-hmm. I went from K through 12 there.
Well, then you went off to the wicked east.
That's
I'm only
right.
kidding when I say that, I have to say that. But to Vassar, and Vassar has a wonderful reputation as an outstanding women's college. I don't know if they've gone through that transition, but tell us a little bit about your time. When I say transition, I mean towards a co-ed atmosphere. Maybe you could answer that and tell us a little about what it was like to go to school at Vassar.
Well, it is the only seven-sister school that has gone co-ed. And we had about 60% women, 40% men there when I was a student. And I think it was one of the most wonderful experiences of my life because it was small and nurturing and had a wonderful student-teacher ratio and really helped me develop my powers of critical thinking, my communication skills, and my sense of self-worth. And I carry that with me to this day also. I was the editor of the school paper and involved in student government and a counselor to my fellow students through a kind of a resident assistant type program. And worked several internships, one in Washington, D.C., one in New York. I lobbied for the bottle bill for New York State, bringing all the wisdom of Oregon with me to New York. And I got a lot of good initial experience in the world of politics as well there.
Well, your major and your BA was in political science. Mm-hmm. Did you have a political future in mind at that time?
I think I enjoyed the study of politics, both from a theoretical and a practical point of view. I wrote my thesis on the public interest movement, which was then a 10-year-old phenomenon, and that thesis took a look at both the theory of, well, how does one know what it is that is the public interest, and also how do the groups that do that, environmental groups, women's groups, and the like, how do they know that they're representing the public interest? How do they know that they're accountable to the people they claim to represent? And so I've always had an intellectual fascination with that and also a commitment to work in political campaigns, which I then did after I graduated.
Well, you graduated in 1980, mm-hmm. and in 1988 you became executive director for the Commission on Women. Did I get
91.
that right? Oh, 91.
Right.
Well, then let me fill in some gaps here then. From 1980 to 91, give us an idea of some of the work you did. You mentioned already internships. I couldn't tell if that was while you were still in school or after. Okay.
That was during school. But then when I came home, my first job out of school was as a sometime reporter for Willamette Week newspaper. I also worked in publishing for a while, putting proofreading skills, one of those jobs to pay the rent while I did a lot of volunteer work. I was on the board of several nonprofit groups. I worked on campaigns both for issues and candidates that I believed in, and ultimately came to work for an organization in the private industry called Professional Writing Service, and I managed the Portland office and was a wordsmith for a living and manager. Did that for about 6 years and also worked part-time in a women's health clinic as a counselor.
Well, tell me about your work then, beginning with your executive director position for the Commission for Women.
When I was nominated for this job, I thought it was the ideal combination of a lot of my interests, both politics and communications, wordsmithing, public speaking, and also the counseling aspect. There are many a times I am simply on the phone with a citizen, hearing a tale of woe and doing what I can to remedy their problems. And it really blended all of the skills that I bring to bear, as well as my skills in management of a small business, because running an agency is a lot like small business management. And so I interviewed for the job and was lucky enough to be chosen. I think it's the best job in the world and an absolute privilege.
I'm going to pause for a moment and mention to our audience that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and I'm your host. Capital Insight is designed to give us all a chance to develop some more insight into what's going on in our capital city here in Salem and things that involve people in our capital community. Our guest is Lori Wimmer, who is the Executive Director of the Oregon Commission for Women. And we were just talking about that job that you've been working at since 91 or 90?
1991.
1991. So you've had...
well, November 90 I started.
November
so.
90.
Yeah.
So you've had about 2.5 years, a little more than that.
Right.
In that role, do you find that you have developed a broader knowledge of some of the issues confronting women in Oregon?
Absolutely. It's one thing to know from a philosophical point of view what the key issues are as identified by experts in the women's community. It's quite another to answer the phone and read the mail and go into the communities and learn from the citizens themselves what their preeminent interests are. And I think that in many cases, the theoretical stands are based on a real understanding of the everyday problems of women, but there's nothing like being present in the moment to hear those stories, which are often gut-wrenching. There have been days when I have put my head down on my desk and cried on behalf of some of the constituents who've called our office, and I treasure that experience. I think it's made me a better citizen, if not a better player in the process.
Well, as you work in that process, I mean, we've worked together on a number of pieces of legislation, both back in the last session when I was on the Judiciary Committee, and now sometimes in the appropriations process, or just working on bills together. Do you find that you can identify what I'll call a political agenda that on a broad basis is progressive as far as women are concerned for the state?
I'm not sure I understand exactly what you're getting at.
Has this helped you identify issues that need to be addressed for women in this state?
Sure. Very clearly, there are some critical issues. The health of a person and their economic health are absolutely essential ingredients to survival in our society, and while that might sound obvious and simple, on a practical level, women are still earning just 70 cents of what a man earns, 70 cents to every dollar a man earns, and we still don't have the same kinds of access to health care, coverage for health benefits that are provided to males and for the same premium dollar. So those are some of the kinds of issues that are going to absolutely stand in the way of women becoming fully participants in our society, taxpayers, if you will, rather than beneficiaries of tax dollars.
In terms of the economics of all of this, we've seen some shift in the family system so that there's more and more single head of family units out there, and it's more often than not the woman who is given the custody of the children and the need to maintain and care for the kids in, say, a divorce, for example. And as we go through that, are you finding that we're confronted more and more by the fact that you have two disparities at work here now? One is the original economic disparity between men and women in the workforce, and now it's coupled with the disparity of the woman being given the extra responsibility, even as she's now alone with the kids, of having to take care of them financially as well as emotionally and everything else?
That's right. Very few people pay support, and when they do, they pay it for the first couple of years, the person who is obliged by the dissolution decree to pay it. And so, as a consequence, usually, though most caregivers are happy to continue the privilege of being the primary caregivers to their children, they need to have the dollars coming in to do that above the poverty level, and it's simply not a fact of life for most women in Oregon that they're able to do that without struggling enormously. The simple things, if you manage to be able to afford the money for a babysitter for one night out in 6 months, how then, when you come home, do you get the babysitter home? Do you wake up the children and put them back in the car and cart the babysitter across town to home? Or do you hand the babysitter cab fare, yet another expense? The simple logistics of life that we don't think of. Another example would be the so-called workfare programs. If we provide child care for that welfare-dependent mother, single parent, so that she goes into the workforce at some minimum wage dead-end job rather than simply collecting a welfare check. That sounds wonderful to the extent that it's dancing for your dinner, what have you, but what about women in rural areas without taxi service, without bus service, with no means to purchase a car? How does that woman get her children to daycare, then to the job, then back to daycare to pick them up, and then home safely every day of the week? Those kinds of logistics may not seem like critical elements of the women's agenda from a theoretical point of view, but I will tell you those calls come in every day to my office as identified as problems that we do need to work out.
Do you find the Commission for Women is trying to put together legislative packages to address those kinds of problems?
That's right. We've been working since January of 1992 with a broad ad hoc task force called the Women's Health and Wellness Task Force, put together by Representative Gail Shibley, Representative Kate Brown, Senator Tricia Smith, and others, various others, both in the political process and out of it, from community groups, lots of experts on different pieces of the puzzle. And we've been working for a very long time to generate what we call the Health and Wellness Act of 1993, which is essentially a three-legged stool. The first, SB 904, is a package of bills to protect women from violence, particularly domestic violence, which is at a critical level, the leading cause of injury and death to women. 905, SB 905, is the health package that would enable women to be guaranteed coverage in their health insurance policy for things like gynecological exams, mammographies. Teenage daughters in a family policy are not covered for maternity care by most policies, and so a lot of teenagers are making decisions on economic levels whether or not to carry a pregnancy to term based on the fact that they're going to bankrupt their family to do so because they're not covered. Those are some of the kinds of pieces in that bill. And then the third leg is a bill to fund the Commission for Women, SB 906.
Well, when you start looking at these three legs of this stool, are you finding that there's a big challenge in the current legislative session, the 1993 session, to come up with the funds to move forward on these issues?
There's a challenge in this 1993 session to fund everything, of course, and we're sensitive to the need to be very critically careful about what programs get funded when there's so few pieces of the pie to go around. And so we look at prevention and we look at cost effectiveness for all programs and say, what can we do to get the biggest bang for the buck, frankly? And these are all programs that we believe will actually save money in the long run. For example, the Commission for Women, we did a study, we had an intern, Master's in Public Administration candidate, do a study of the value of the Commission for Women versus investment. So for every general fund dollar invested in funding the Commission for Women, we found that we return $1.60. And so while lawmakers look at the prospect of a $1.2 billion budget for shortfall, it seems to me penny wise and pound foolish not to consider those programs that actually deliver a return.
Would mammography be a good example of a prevention program that will have a financial return over the years?
Absolutely. The cost of mammography to the provider, to the insurance company, is about 44 cents a month per policyholder. And the average cancer is going to cost $125,000. And because we don't have a cure yet for breast cancer, early detection is the only hope we have of saving the hundreds of lives that are lost to that disease every year for Oregon women.
Now, we've had mammography legislation, which, as I recall, passed the House, and since it was a Senate bill, I assume that there's been concurrence, or if there were amendments. Tell us where we are with the mammography legislation.
Well, we came up with a strategy of putting together the package of the Health and Wellness Act on the Senate side, and then various pieces that we felt were the stars of the bills, if you would, came out as independent bills on the House side. And it is the independent House bill that succeeded in passing out of the House and will probably be passing out of the Senate soon as well. We also have just found out today that we will be the House Commerce Committee will be hearing SB 905, or at least portions of it, though they're drafting amendments that will gut significant sections of that bill, I think.
I should mention to our audience that although we always try to be time sensitive, we also try to not present a program as of a particular date. In this case, Lori and I talked about it, and we decided we need to be pretty specific because we're actually taping this program for showings, and we're talking about things as of near the end, we hope, of the legislative session. And so we do want to mention that we're taping this on July 12, and there may be an update at some point in the news as to where we are in some of these bills. And I hope you will take the time to check the newspapers to see where we are. But you're with us on Capital Insight, and I'm your host, Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem. And our guest is Lori Wimmer, Executive Director of the Oregon Commission for Women. And we were talking about this legislative package and where it is. There's 3 Senate bills which combine these features, and then there's individual pieces of these of the legislation in some House bills. The Senate bills, in terms of the packages, give us an idea of the directions they would move us if they passed into law. Can you do that? Give us a sketch of what's happening with that legislation.
We feel that the package represents the whole woman, if you will. Her physical safety, her voice of empowerment, and her ability to remain safe and free from disease and to survive disease. And that's why those pieces were broken out, sort of justice, health, and then the advocacy. And health and wellness together are considered a package because you need to have a physical being to survive, but we also recognize, and so does the OMA, incidentally, the American Medical Association, I should say, has been a very strong advocate for strengthening laws related to family violence because it is increasingly becoming recognized as the #1 killer of women. And so while that is a criminal justice issue, it is also a health issue.
Well, you and I have worked together on some of the I'll call them family protection pieces of legislation. There is the Family Abuse Protection Act, which we've sought modification on this session, and we've had some success because we have had one bill pass. I'm not sure if the governor signed it yet, but the House and the Senate have agreed on it, and I was pleased to see that. That would provide more protection. Do you have some other Family Abuse Protection Act type bills? I should mention the one we're talking about involved, first of all, giving access to the courts for someone who is under the age of 18. There was some question as to whether or not a minor could get access to a protective order. It also opened up the law to people who had had a relationship but had not actually been living together, because there were a lot of boyfriend-girlfriend situations where the boyfriend, ex-boyfriend may become violent, but they'd never been living together, and right now the law had required that you actually have been living together. Is there any other legislation other than the stalking bill, which we'll talk about in a minute, but any other legislation we should be watching for on the family abuse protection side?
There is the one bill that would modify the Family Abuse Prevention Act. We were not the sponsors of that bill, so I'm not as much an expert on that as I might otherwise be. There are workload issues. At some point, pieces fall off as you become more directed for certain pieces of legislation. There's one other modification, a little fix-it to the Family Abuse Prevention Act, which I might indicate, by the way, is a model for the nation. That Oregon has won acclaim for its sensitivity and its continuing expertise and ability to understand marital rape, for example, as a crime. Domestic violence protections for women have been good. They can be better, but they have been, well, actually, I should say it swings both ways. It's not just to protect women. There are men who are abused as well, and you need to be clear about that. So the two pieces that would modify the Family Abuse Protection Act, I think, are doing just fine. There are also in the contents of SB 904, some language about protecting people who have been victims of domestic violence. When someone has been arrested, as a condition of release, having the courts look at whether or not their pattern or practice of violent behavior indicates that they ought not be released, as another criterion for looking at condition of release. There are also pieces, that SCR 1 is a Senate Concurrent Resolution 1, which would ask the legislature through a designated body, a task force, if you will, to look at how many women might be in Oregon's prison system right now who, if it were not for a history of being abuse survivors, would not be there. And that could mean they finally rose up and defended themselves against their abuser. It might have been that they committed a crime under duress by an abuser. And so we're asking the legislature to take a look at to what degree there are tax dollars being wasted to incarcerate people who are no threat to society and who did their time when they were under the terror of the abuser and should now be let out of prison and allowed to lead a healthy life.
Let's shift to a related area, which is stalking, and you and I have worked very closely together on that legislation for over a year now, and we're hoping to be near the fruition of this project. We've got a Senate version and a House version which differ in a couple of respects, and it's in conference committee right now as we speak. But can you talk a little bit about the development of that legislation or the concerns that we're addressing with that bill?
Well, one of the things, it's nice to be able to have an opportunity to thank you on the record for convening the yet another one of those ad hoc task forces of experts who got together in a room and concerned citizens and said, what can we do to close a hole in existing law? And I really am proud to have been able to participate in that. We've worked together to try to develop a concept that goes one better over existing laws in other states, that provides something with real teeth to put abusers of any citizen behind bars if that's warranted, to put them on notice to stop stalking behavior if that lesser response is warranted instead, to provide a range of remedies for victims of stalking. And I think that's something that the public has made demonstrably clear that they really want, and I'm confident that we'll have a bill signed into law that will do just that.
Now I need to talk about an area where we're not quite so confident we're going to see a bill signed into law, and it's an area of mutual concern. It's the Oregon Commission for Women itself. As we speak, a budget for the commission is stalled in the House Appropriations Committee, and we're talking perhaps $120,000, maybe it tops $140,000 for a 2-year budget to operate the commission we've been talking about for the last half hour. And of course there's some concern that the budget may not make it. In terms of per capita expense, what are we talking about here?
A nickel per female in Oregon. And it's interesting, one legislator said to me just today, gosh, I guess women aren't worth a dime.
Oh boy. Well, we have an issue that's pending, and I guess the question is, will the House leadership press forward and do something to make sure that this Commission for Women continues to exist? Have you had any feedback lately that gives us any sign of hope?
I wish I could be more hopeful. I really feel as though, you know, I think it was said once long ago by someone very wise that politics is a little like sausage. That what we end up with is not laws but sausage. And unfortunately, in the giant chess game of life, it looks like we might be one of the pawns. The budget is, quite frankly, about the cost for 2 years of what 4 days of the legislative session costs for one chamber. And it's a tiny, tiny amount of money to field an enormous benefit, both in terms of goodwill and good works for the women of Oregon. And I would say that we're not just about women. We are a commission for women, for men, for families, for all Oregonians, because most typically women are the caregivers and bringing up the next generation, and what is economically and in terms of their health and their status as participating citizens and taxpayers good for those women is also good for their families, for their communities, and indeed for the whole state. We don't have a human being to waste. And so I would hope that I'm wrong about this, but it looks pretty gloomy right now. The leadership of the Budget Writing Committee appears to be resolute.
Well, I'd like to say I admire your dogged resolution on your own behalf and on behalf of the Oregon Commission for Women. And I will mention to our audience, if you happen to be watching on July 13 or July 20, the legislature will probably still be in session. And you can always let Speaker Larry Campbell of the House of Representatives know what you think about the Commission for Women, or John Mannix, who is chair of the Appropriations Committee. Please give them my regards if you give them a call. If it's after July 20, check to find out whether or not we're still in session. With that, thank you for joining us on Capital Insight, and if at any time you have any questions, comments, or concerns, I look forward to hearing from you. And I'm your host, Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and our guest has been Lori Wimmer, Executive Director of the Commission for Women. Thank you.